Simon, please come forward. Simon is bringing a panel of colleagues, all AUHF members. So Simon Walley from the World Bank. And we have our chairman, Kehinde Ogundimu, and Johnston Oltetia, and Oscar Mgaya, the Nigeria Mortgage Refinance Company, Oscar from the Tanzania Mortgage Refinance Company, and Joe from the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company. And we'll be talking about how all of you are pitching green. Great, thank you very much. Can you turn on the microphones for the panel? Thank you.
Got it. Good morning, everyone. Before I start, thank you very much, Kesia. Thank you very much to AUHF for organising this. I think it's my first conference in 2 or 3 years. I think there's been a bit of a hiatus, but it's kind of great to be back and to meet with everyone. Thank you very much to May, to Hala, and the whole SHMFF team for hosting us and for organising this. And so, yeah, so this panel, I've got the CEOs of KMRC, TMRC, NMRC, and I think yesterday we had a good discussion. We were talking about all the different elements of the housing value chain, from the kind of the supply side, the building materials, the distribution, the financing, and the need to make each of those links in the value chain green. So I think the link we've got here is the capital markets part of that value chain. And I think almost more than any other part of that value chain, it has the power to really scale up both affordable housing and green housing. I think through capital markets, you've got the power to almost change the whole economics of housing and bring in kind of those green incentives. I think Rusmir yesterday spoke about the need for carrots, sticks, and tambourines to really promote and drive the green agenda. I'm really convinced that capital markets, the MLC companies, have got the power to do all of that and be the biggest cheerleaders for driving kind of a green housing change in Africa. So let's kind of just jump in to this. I think we've got about half an hour, 40 minutes or so. I've got 3 or 4 prepared questions, but then I'm going to open it up to you guys. So start thinking about questions and we'll open it up. So the first question, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists this, is just for them if they could give a very kind of brief introduction to their institution. Secondly, talk very briefly again about any green initiatives they have. And then thirdly, talk about their governments and what their governments are doing for green housing very briefly. So maybe I can start with you, Kenny.
Thank you very much, Simon. So I'll talk briefly about NMRC. We are a secondary liquidity provider, a secondary mortgage market operator in Nigeria, and our job is essentially to link the debt capital market with the financial market. So we are an intermediary. We go into the capital market, issue long-term funding, and then on-lend those funding to the financial sector. As you know, the banks have short-term money, so they need long-term money. And then because we have the guarantee of the federal government of Nigeria, we're able to issue debt instruments, long-dated debt instruments, and then on-lend to them. So essentially, we're an intermediary between the capital and the financial markets. In the Nigerian green space, what has happened? So I'll say that in the last 5 years, it's more of we've had 5 bond issuances, green bond issuances. Most of them have been power related, you know, so solar panels, mini grid application. One has been more like a climate bond, which is for climate defense protection. And then the others have been, you know, just on grids and power. We have in Nigeria the Green Climate Bond Initiative, where you have the financial sector deepening, a private sector organization, Climate Bond Initiative, and then FMDQ and Exchange. They are the three agencies or entities that are spearheading that. So they started first with capacity building, you know, training verifiers, training rating agencies, training all those that are involved, and even banks about what it means to be green, how you're going to verify the reports that you're going to render, and things like that, you know. So we have the rating agencies ready to do green. The verifiers are there, they've been trained. The banks have been trained, the issuers have been trained, which is people like us and all of that. So capacity building. And then there's now the execution aspect, which is supporting entities to issue green instrument, which I said we have done 5 in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do anything on the housing side because the stock is not there. We have not been able to aggregate the developers to even access funds, but we are working on that. And so I'll say, yes, we're not there yet for housing, but the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria has set out the guidelines and parameters for issuances of bonds and all that it entails and the reporting. So I'll say regulatory aspect is on ground and is working efficiently. It's been demonstrated to have that capacity. We have issued 2 sovereigns, so we have an idea of how to price the instruments because we are going to price enough of sovereign debt instrument. So I'll say everything is in place and it's just now for us to create the assets and then we'll be able to do green bond issuance from NMRC. Maybe I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you, Kenny. Oscar, over to you.
Thank you very much. Similarly to Nigeria Mortgage Refinance Company, I don't have to repeat what we do. We exactly do the same thing they do, as well as Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company. Going to the question that Simon asked, I'll try to explain it in 3 levels. First, regionally, how Tanzania has played a role. Secondly, what the government is doing. And thirdly, I'll talk about TMRC. So regionally, I'm very proud that the President of Tanzania, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, is the champion of the green agenda. She was here for COP27. Some of you may know during her speech, she proposed an $18 billion proposal for the Southern African countries to deal with this green agenda. I think it's 12 countries regionally, and this proposal is to help to channel these funds into the green agenda. So she's a champion regionally. But moving on specifically to Tanzania, she's also been very deliberate about the agenda of green. We do, through the UNGCF, she has had a number of programs to support the green agenda. There are some laws that were passed, for example, in the areas of preserving the environment. So plastic bags, for example, are banned in Tanzania. This is part of the initiative to reserve the environment. There are other initiatives in terms of planting trees and things of that nature. So as a government, I think that the government of Tanzania is really keen in supporting this agenda and is at the forefront on that. As far as TMRC, what we have done as an institution, one, we are working currently on our medium-term note program, second medium-term program. Our first medium-term program is ending May next year. On this new medium-term program for bond issuance, we are actually going to incorporate issuances of green bonds. We are looking at also other products like social bonds, sukuk, which is the Islamic compliant bonds. So we're going from the MTN1, where we're primarily doing the plain vanilla bond issuances, to MTN2, which we're preparing to incorporate this type of bond issuances, including green. To that effect, we've just recently signed an MOU with IFC to support us in our green agenda bond issuance journey. So This was done about a month ago, and we are on that journey. But we also, we've been for the past, I think, 6 months, we've been undergoing the process of joining the UNGCF fund, or rather accreditation of the UNGCF. In Tanzania, there's only one institution that's accredited. We're working towards that to see, to accomplish us being the second one. And I think that provides for funding and other resources through the UNGCF. And that process is actually ongoing, and we hope to complete it in the very near future. Let me stop there, and thank you.
Great, thank you, Oscar. Johnston, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues. We're very glad to, sit among colleagues here and who are particularly concerned about providing housing to the people. I'm very happy to be in this conference over these 3 days. Now, I don't have to describe anything about KMRC because it's exactly the same as what we have with NMRC and TMRC. So we apparently, even what they have described made my life easier because it seemed like we are reading from the same script. But specifically when you look at, for example, what the government of Kenya are doing, in 2017, the government of Kenya issued or developed a green bond program. And the intention was and remain is certainly to mobilize local green bond issuances within the country. Now, first, immediately after that, actually, the regulators, the Capital Markets Authority and the Securities Exchange issued guidelines for purposes of enabling any institution to issue green bonds. One of the greatest things that the government did at the time and still remain is to try and incentivize issuance of green bonds. And the incentive that the government provided was in form of tax by essentially exempting investors into green bond issuances from withholding tax, which certainly encourages the investors to come into that green bond space. In 2019, Econ, I think somebody mentioned about it yesterday, issued a green bond. Econ is a developer of student housing in Kenya. So they issued a green bond in 2019, which was listed in 2020. Now, so we have certainly a policy, or the foundations have been laid on a policy, legal and regulatory framework to enable green bond issuances in Kenya. And so far, there is no impediment to that issuances, and that was tested essentially when Econ issued a green bond in 2019. Now, when you look at what KMRC is doing, we started the journey this year. So we actually held, we brought together key stakeholders on the green housing agenda, I think in Q2 this year. And the intention was to have a conversation to lay the foundations for issuances of green bonds and also look at the supply of green affordable housing. Now, and this we work together with IFC and the Kenya Green Development Association. And the idea is to start the journey. Now, we have a bond, which a medium-term note, which was issued this year. But we were looking at potential to issue a green as one of the tranches. And it will not be too difficult in our case because we'll just issue a supplementary information memorandum which obviously with a green agenda or the green bond issue. But we will not issue a bond unless we have visibility of green developments. Because of course, you know, the most significant difference between a green bond and conventional bond is basically utilization of funds. And because we have to channel the funds to green housing, we certainly have to have visibility of the supply. And that's why we brought the stakeholders together for purposes of starting to build that journey so that we have clear supply or developments that meet the criteria for greening. And then we issue the bond, and then of course, we channel the funds to that development. So that's where we are so far. We've just started the journey, and I believe we're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnston. One of the things that all of you have got in common is the need to get investors to come in. And I think that to get green investors to come in, there's a question of confidence and trust. They need to know that the money they're providing in isn't going to be just greenwashed and is going to genuinely deliver CO2 impacts and green housing. To do that, you need a lot of data. And I think we heard yesterday from, I think the company was Estate Intel, was it from ETA, about some kind of efforts to start collecting data. I wonder, I mean, Johnston, you're the most advanced in terms of preparing or thinking about a green bond. How do you think you can satisfy investors' needs to really kind of see through the instrument to the end results in terms of data collection and data provision? Is there more that could be done? I mean, one thing I really liked about the presentation yesterday was that it's doing it on a cross-country basis, so you can benchmark things a bit. What's the situation in Kenya? Could more be done in terms of green building data collection?
So yeah, we still have a challenge with data, and I'm glad Kesia has been on our case on building data, which is extremely important. Of course, you need data to make decisions. Now, but you also need, I think the most important thing that any investor needs in capital markets is credibility. So you have to build credibility within the market. I'm aware that the certified green properties in Kenya, at least for housing that we know, is only about 100 houses or 100 units. Potentially there could be more, but we don't have the data. Again, that's, I think, the challenge that we have. But we can build the narrative, we can build the data, and certainly build the confidence, because that's what any investor in the market needs. Now, we started the journey, and ideally bringing people together essentially is the beginning of building that journey. So we have some information already, and I think we have been working with the Kenya Green Building Society and the IFC, and in fact, it's out of that conversation that we realized we have a couple of satisfied green housing. But the majority of those certified green housing are actually commercial properties, which is not what we do. I mean, we do not refinance commercial properties. So the idea is to build the data sufficiently for the residential housing, which is essentially what we are doing right now.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and to Oscar and Kenny, I mean, Oscar, you publish regularly kind of data together with the Bank of Tanzania. And I think MRCs are generally in a privileged position in the fact that you've got complete oversight over the mortgage market. I mean, your members represent all the biggest lenders. I mean, is there more that you could be doing in terms of collecting data, kind of setting some standards in terms of information? Oscar?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I think, as it has been said, data is the key. And unfortunately for our continent, and specifically in Tanzania, although we've made a bit of progress, but we still have a long way to go. So the data on the mortgage portfolios is becoming available. We're doing this with the central bank, with the bank's requirement to report. But we need to collaborate more with the Ministry of Housing and other stakeholders to get additional data which can be useful in terms of the justification for the value proposition in terms of green housing. And I think that's an area where, we are learning in this conference, and we need probably more learning in terms of how do we best collaborate to collect that data. Because for investors, that information is useful to build a case. There's some apprehension. Some investors are thinking green can be a bit expensive initially, so what is the value proposition? We need to show maybe initially it can be, but over a long period of time, there are actually benefits, and that's something that without data you can't do. And I think we need more data to justify that. And I think collectively we need to find models that can help us to bring the necessary stakeholders to be able to have this data available. I think investors are looking at the bottom line in many cases. While they want to do good, but they want to do well with their investment. So I think we need to marry the fact that they can do good, but they can also do well in the long run in terms of their bottom line. Thank you.
Yeah, the importance of data cannot be overemphasized, and at NMRC, in fact, I think Casey and I will be signing an MOU at this conference. We have identified about 117 data elements that need to be gathered, and in Nigeria, we have set up a data coalition committee, including the Central Bank, National Population Commission, and all the relevant agencies. And we at NMRC are the repository for that or those information, and we have been gathering them. So it's just a matter of we're waiting. There's going to be a population census carried out early next year, which will provide the last bastion of data that we need. So NMRC is actually driving the agenda of data gathering, data collation, working with CAF in South Africa to make sure that we're capturing all the right elements and everything. So I'll say we have gone a long way in gathering the data. We just need a few more things. And then the regularity, we've also agreed with every stakeholder, the ones that need to be submitted monthly, quarterly, and all of that. And everybody's working towards that. I also want to latch on what my other colleagues have said about the issuer credibility. I think at NMRC we have demonstrated, because when you're talking about green bonds and all of that, very important is the use of proceeds. You want to be able to ensure that it goes to actually what it's meant to do and all of that. We have demonstrated in the last 3 or 4 bond issuances that we have done that we're a credible organization. That has been reflected in our rating. We started from BBB+, now we're AA+, and so investors have confidence in us, which is important, And then now, as I said, we already have verifiers, rating agencies that will also help when we eventually issue green bond to make them more comfortable. So I'll say we're on the right trajectory. The line of travel or the direction of travel is very clear. We're just moving at fast speed to get to the finish line.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that is great about this event is just the timing of it. So the COP is just over, and I think there was some really very heated discussions, particularly around the area of who pays for a lot of the climate change impacts, the spending on mitigation, in fact, to reduce CO2, the adaptation costs. I think the PM of the Bahamas, I think, was particularly vocal about this, Philip Davis, saying that the rich countries need to bear a significant part of the costs. I mean, after all, the problem wasn't created by African countries. I mean, it's the rich countries that have put the world in this position. Oscar, you spoke about your president equally kind of giving out a strong message. So I'm just thinking on housing, how could this play out? Could you, I mean, you mentioned the GCF fund for Southern Africa. I mean, to my mind, MRCs are very well placed to channel this sort of funding, kind of having some sort of Pan-African climate fund with a housing window that could then be channeled and create incentives for people to go towards green housing and get the developers to build it. So it's kind of really an open question, kind of brainstorming a bit, and something maybe for Kesia's declaration of whether some sort of Pan-African fund with a housing window. I mean, Al Gore's the other one who's talking a lot about these things, and it needs to be at that sort of kind of level of thinking, I think, to have impact. So it's really kind of an open question, just kind of what your views are, ideas, thoughts on this. Maybe start with you, Oscar.
Thank you. Very good question, Simon. Of course, I'm conflicted, so my answer will always be yes, because I want the funds to be channeled through MRCs. But in all seriousness, I think the way I at least personally view this, these funds will have several different interventions. So housing, I think, would be one of them, and probably a big one. But there will be also other interventions, funds needed for other interventions in the area of green. So whether it's planting trees or all the different other initiatives would make it a more comprehensive intervention. But for the portion that's going to housing, in all seriousness, I think we are better placed to deal with that, because we're already in the market, we're already intervening in this very same sector. So I think it's almost natural that MRCs can be really well placed to manage these funds with collaboration and support from the different, from the governments. So that's my thinking on this, at least at this initial stage. Thank you.
Yeah, I should say I'm slightly conflicted as well, that we're working on kind of a regional initiative, initially with Kenya and Uganda, and the next panel, my colleague Khadija will kind of give you a lot more details about it. But Kenny, do you want...
I couldn't agree more with Oscar. I think because we are essentially wholesale market players, so we are more positioned to intermediate between whatever is coming and then the markets which we're already dealing with. You know, imagine having to deal directly with the retailers, the banks, and all of that. So many of them. So I think just by our setup and by the nature of the way we operate as wholesalers, we're best positioned to do that. You know, we're already helping improve even the efficiencies and operations of the primary markets by the uniform underwriting standards and a few things. So we already have that track record of wholesale financial institutions that people either directly or indirectly report to us, or we have access to how the business is done and things like that. So we're a better place to do that, especially for housing. And I think housing, as Oscar said, will be the biggest part of it, because when you look at emissions and the effects of GHG, almost 40% comes from housing. You know, so what better place to start than with the wholesale players in different institutions. And we also have an umbrella body, so we're not just operating in our different countries. We have the ASMA where we meet, you know, and then we have the ISMA where all MRCs in the world will also meet, you know, so it's easier to walk through any of those levers and get to the bottom and have something that is standardized and uniform across the globe.
Great, thank you. Katie, I'm not sure how much time I didn't check when we started. Should I open it up for questions? I don't know if there's anyone in the audience. We've got 5 minutes, so maybe take a couple of questions.
Simon, can I just...
put up your hands. Oh, please, Johnson. Yeah.
So that you don't finish before I say something about the fund. Now, I think 3 to 4 years ago, Kenya's National Treasury established a climate finance unit, which works with GCF and a number of other funding partners. Now, when you have a fund of that kind, which is purposely within the financing arm of a government, it may potentially be appropriate to have a housing component under that. Because I think the focus that has been there in the climate fund unit that in Kenya has mainly been on water and energy, which is obviously, for obvious reasons, those are the easier ones to run with. But housing is a very important aspect of this. And of course, I think like my colleague here mentioned, there is that duality effect, you know, of good for the environment, but also good for your bottom line. So it may potentially be possible that we can purposely have an establishment of, an arm that has to do with mobilizing financing for green housing development as part of, obviously, the bigger fund that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnston. Any questions from the audience? I've got more questions, so I can keep going with mine. Sorry, I can't see. I've got the lights. Okay, at the back. Deborah, please.
No.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ololanraju from Oltetia. So I wear two hats. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Also, I said my name is Ololanraju. I wear two hats. I work for an advisory firm called Oltetia, but I'm also a co-founder of a green housing development company. We're just starting our first project in Nigeria, financed by Real. The question is that I think as lessons we've learned that I'm not saying this is the easiest part, but actually trying to attract finances for this sort of project is probably the easiest part compared to how you enable the delivery on the ground in terms of encouraging developers. So I would just be interested in terms of the panel, in your thinking, in your planning for mainstreaming green mortgages or green finance, where your thought about the pipeline, the enabling the developers to build green homes. We saw the data yesterday that made it very clear that the number of certified green homes is actually non-existent in terms of the numbers in Africa. So without the pipeline, how are you going to deliver your returns to your investors? And I'm saying from practical experience, we've been trying to do this without any enabling environmental support from government. So we've been interested to see what are your thoughts about that.
Okay. Any other questions? We can take one more. No. Please, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the CEO for NMRC on the experience when it comes to going to capital markets to issue the green bond. You talked about having issued 5 papers in the capital markets. So looking at the cost that the cost of the corporate bonds, the green bonds that you raise, and channeling that to refinancing, which needs to be affordable, how do you balance those two aspects? The capital markets are in Africa in general quite expensive, and you still need those funds to drive affordability when it comes to the refinancing part of it. How is the Nigerian experience? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So maybe you can deal with that one quickly, Kenny, because it's sovereign bonds that have been issued in Nigeria, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'll start with the second question, which is considering the cost in Nigeria, of conventional bonds. Green bonds will be somewhere close to that, But I think what we will do is try to get some subsidy, maybe from donors and all of that, so that you can then blend the funds and make it more available, more affordable. We'll also encourage banks to also lower the spread, So it's a different thing, you get into capital markets and then you issue bonds and we on-lend and then they layer in so many spreads and things like that. But because for green assets, they are more structurally sound, there are so many benefits to them. I think the spread, and most of the time, those who will buy green assets also have, in quote, better repayment records, or they should have, because they are more concerned about the environment and things like that, So I think we'll also try and adjust the spread, encourage more persuasion to the banks to lower the spread so that then it becomes more attractive to them. On the first question, which is about the supply, what we are trying to do in Nigeria, we understand that completely. But we've had some successes with EcoStone. They came and did about maybe 200 houses that were certified even by IFC Edge. What we're trying to do in Nigeria is for MRCs, we're trying to see if our regulators can assist us by maybe tampering rather with our regulations such that our bond issuances, some aspect of it, so let's say I issue a bond for $1 million. Can I take 800,000 to attack the demand side and then use 200,000 to attack the supply side so that, because it's a shorter life cycle, you can then have a good churn so they are producing at the same time, you have something on the demand side. So we're still tinkering with that, that can we intervene on both the demand and the supply side, but very little on the demand side because the life cycle is very short, so if you can get quick turnover on that side and then you have something on the demand side.
Okay. Oscar, what were you doing for the green housing pipeline?
The approach that we are taking in Tanzania, it's a tripartite arrangement. So first you must have a project that qualifies as a green project, housing units that will be built in that manner. And then you must have, obviously, banks issuing green mortgages. And then as a secondary market player, the MRC then can issue a green bond to support that transaction. So the approach that we are taking now is early days, but we're trying to work with specific projects that will be green, supported by green mortgages, and then being refinanced by a green bond. That's what we're working on. It's work in progress. Thank you.
Now, supply is generally a problem. Green supply is even a greater problem. Now, so we have to actually go to the basics first. Can we find a mechanism for getting supply, whether green or not? Because that remains the greatest challenge that we face. Now, in Kenya, at the initial stages, we had two approaches. One of supporting demand, and that is provision of long-term end-user finance, certainly at concessional rates, and one of developing a framework for enabling supply. Now, we understand the greatest challenge that a developer has, and what potentially creates the greatest risk, is actually offtake. They need to have clear visibility of offtake. They can take construction finance from a bank, but then the funds will be locked in if there will be no off-takers. So that's one of the greatest challenges that they face. Now, so we, had to a large extent sorted out the demand side, because end-user finance at long-term rates is currently being supported by KMRC. But we continue to face a challenge because we got some resistance on the development of an institution, or actually a fund, under the National Housing Corporation of Kenya, called National Housing Development Fund. So that didn't move as quickly as was anticipated, and the challenge was actually funding for that arm. Now there is a renewed impetus to reestablish that. With the current, we have a new government which came into place this year, and there is renewed impetus to get that going. And so far, the discussion that is going around is to put in place a structure for supporting supply, so that we have some kind of guarantee, offtake guarantee that can be taken up by that institution, and potentially even a guarantee for construction, like, for example, providing some sort of guarantee to banks on the side of, for purposes of enabling lending or supporting construction finance. So before we even come to the green part, I think we have to sort out the supply generally, because it remains a critical challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think our time is up. So Thank you all very much for your attention, and please join me in thanking my panelists. Thank you.